She was sold for $150, the price of a good horse. Standing on that auction platform in Denver City, 1883, Clara Bennett had no family, no money, no future. Just a spine made of steel and eyes that refused to look away. The man who bought her? A mountain giant with blood under his fingernails, and eyes as empty as a winter sky. They called him Elijah Stone, a man the whole town feared, a man who hadn't spoken to another soul in 8 years. But he didn't buy her for the reason you think. Hidden in his cabin was a starving 6-year-old girl who hadn't eaten in 5 days, and a secret dark enough to destroy them all. What Clara found in those mountains was more dangerous than any beast. It was the truth. Welcome to Wild West Stories Channel, where the frontier is wild, the hearts are untamed, and every love story is forged in dust, danger, and devotion. If you love Western romance and cowboy tales that grip you and never let go, you're exactly where you belong. This story reminds us that the people the world calls monsters are sometimes the ones who love the hardest, and that real strength isn't about never breaking, it's about choosing to heal. If this story stirred something in you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me your favorite moment. Share it with someone who needs a good story tonight. And subscribe so you never miss the next ride. Now let's begin.
The last man to bid on Clara Bennett had dried blood under his fingernails. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, with the cold precision of a woman who had long ago learned that survival depended on seeing what others missed. The blood was dark, nearly black, crusted beneath nails that were thick and split from years of hard labor. It could have been animal blood. It could have been something worse. Either way, Clara filed the detail away in the part of her mind that never stopped calculating, never stopped measuring the distance between herself and danger. But that moment was still 30 minutes away. Right now, she stood in the back room of the Rocky Mountain Matrimonial Agency in Denver City, Montana Territory, September of 1883, surrounded by 11 other women who were about to be sold. The room smelled of sweat and cheap rose water, and something sour underneath that Clara suspected was fear given physical form. A girl of maybe 16 sat in the corner with her knees drawn to her chest, sobbing so quietly that the sound barely carried above the murmur of voices. Beside Clara, a woman with red hair and freckles across her nose whispered the Lord's Prayer in a continuous loop, the words bleeding together until they lost all meaning and became simply sound, a wall of syllables erected against reality. Clara counted the cracks in the ceiling. 12. She had been counting things since her father died 9 years ago. Cracks in plaster, steps between rooms, coins in her purse when she still had a purse, days without eating when she no longer did. Numbers were safe. Numbers held still. Numbers did not lie or leave or die in the night while you slept in the next room, believing the world would still be whole come morning. Professor William Bennett of Harvard University had taught her to count. He had also taught her Latin and Greek and French. He had taught her philosophy and literature and the radical notion that a woman's mind was equal to any man's. He had taught her to think clearly and argue precisely and never, ever let fear make her stupid. He had not taught her what to do when all that thinking and arguing led her to a back room in Denver City, waiting to be auctioned like livestock. The matchmaker, a heavy woman named Mrs. Prescott with hands like raw sausages and breath that reeked of onions, moved down the line of women performing her inspections. She checked teeth. She squeezed arms to test for muscle. She lifted chins and turned faces side to side as though evaluating horses at market. When she reached Clara, she paused. "Smile," Mrs. Prescott said. "Show your teeth." Clara showed her teeth. It was not a smile. Mrs. Prescott grunted. "You will fetch a decent price if you can manage to look less like you want to murder someone. Men out here want wives, not vipers." Clara said nothing. Her fingernails cut half-moons into her palms. When Mrs. Prescott moved on, the red-headed woman beside Clara stopped praying long enough to whisper, "Are you not afraid?" Clara considered the question. She was standing in a room that smelled like desperation, wearing a blue calico dress so worn and stained it barely qualified as clothing, waiting to be paraded before a crowd of strangers who would bid on her body and her future and call it matrimony. Her father was dead. Her mother was dead. Her uncle was dead. Her aunt had abandoned her at a trading post in Independence, Missouri, with the words, "You should have died," instead of him ringing in her ears. She had walked and begged and starved her way across half a continent. She had slept in stables and eaten scraps and done laundry for pennies until her hands cracked and bled. She had arrived in Denver City too weak from hunger to stand and had been collected by the agency like a stray dog, fed just enough to make her presentable, and informed of her options. There was one option. This was it. "No," Clara said. "I am not afraid. I am furious." The redhead blinked. Then, incredibly, she laughed. It was a small, broken sound. But it was real. "Good," she said. "Fury is better than tears. Tears never stopped a single bad thing from happening." They called Clara's number at 2:30 in the afternoon. Lot number 7. She walked through the door and into the bright September sunlight and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the platform in the center of Denver City's main square. And every step felt like descending into a grave. The crowd was mostly men, miners with calloused hands and sun-weathered faces, ranchers with bellies that strained against their vests and eyes that moved across her body with the casual assessment of men evaluating a purchase. A few younger fellows hung back at the edges, shifting from foot to foot, too embarrassed or too poor to bid but unwilling to miss the spectacle. Women watched from doorways and windows, their expressions ranging from pity to contempt to a blankness that Clara suspected was self-protection. If you did not look too closely, you did not have to acknowledge what was happening in plain daylight in the center of town. The auctioneer, a round man named Cornelius Fletcher with tobacco-stained teeth and a voice that could carry across a canyon, shuffled his papers and began. Lot number 7, Clara Bennett. 24 years of age, originally from Boston, Massachusetts. Educated, literate, capable of managing a household, teaching children, keeping accounts, no family, no prospects, no previous marriage. He paused, let his gaze sweep across the assembled men, then added the words that made Clara's stomach contract like a fist closing. Virtue guaranteed. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara did not blush. She did not lower her eyes. She stared straight into the mass of faces with a look that dared any single one of them to meet her gaze. Most did not. The ones who did looked away first. This was the only power she had left, the refusal to perform shame. The bidding opened at $50, the price of a good horse, the price of 6 weeks of her labor, the price of everything she was and everything she might become reduced to a number called out by strangers in a dusty square. A miner in the front row raised his hand. $60. Clara studied him, thick-bodied and rough-featured with a gold tooth that caught the sunlight when he grinned. He looked at her the way a dog looks at a bone, something to be consumed and forgotten. An older rancher countered. 75. He was perhaps 60, with a belly that strained his vest buttons, and eyes that lingered too long on her figure. Clara felt her skin crawl, but she did not move. They went back and forth. 80, 85, 90. Each number another nail in the coffin of her former life. Clara stood motionless, watching her future being decided by men who had never spoken to her, never asked her name, never wondered what she thought about anything. She was merchandise, and merchandise did not have opinions. The bidding stalled at $100. The miner shook his head and stepped back, muttering about city girls not being worth the trouble. The rancher smiled, revealing teeth stained brown from years of chewing tobacco. Fletcher opened his mouth to call the sale complete. Then the crowd moved, not walked, not shifted, moved. The way water moves away from a dropped stone, instinctive and immediate. People stepped aside, some quickly and some with visible alarm. A woman near the front grabbed her child and pulled the boy behind her skirts. A man at the edge rested his hand on the holster at his hip, fingers twitching. Something was coming through the crowd, and whatever it was, these frontier people who faced blizzards and grizzlies and bandits as a matter of course wanted no part of it. Clara leaned forward. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Then she saw him. He was the largest man she had ever encountered. Tall enough that his head rose above the crowd like a mountain above foothills. Shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, and then some. He wore a coat made from animal hide, stiff with old blood and older dirt, and his dark hair fell past his shoulders in a matted tangle that had not seen a comb or a barber in what looked like years. A beard swallowed most of his face, thick and wild, leaving visible only the hard ridge of his cheekbones. A nose that had been broken at least once, and his eyes. His eyes were gray. Not the soft gray of morning fog or the warm gray of hearth smoke. The flat, empty gray of a winter sky before a killing storm. There was no warmth in those eyes. There was no cruelty either. There was nothing. An absence so complete it was more frightening than any expression could have been. He reminded Clara of the wolf she had seen in Missouri, standing at the edge of a field at dusk, starving, ribs visible through matted fur, but still watching, still ready to bite. Not because it wanted to, because it had forgotten any other way to exist. Whispers erupted. She caught fragments. That is Elijah Stone. Stone. Thought he died up in those mountains, 8 years gone. Why would he come down now? The man called Elijah Stone stopped in front of the platform. The crowd gave him a wide berth. Even Fletcher seemed unsettled, his jovial manner cracking. $150, Stone said. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel crushed beneath a boot. But it cracked on the second syllable, the sound of a man who had not spoken to another human being in a long time. He did not shout the bid. He simply spoke, and somehow the silence that surrounded him carried the words to every ear. The rancher sputtered. 110. Stone's expression did not change. 150. Silence. $150 was more than most of these men earned in several months. The rancher's face reddened, but he shook his head and stepped back. Fletcher recovered. 150 from Mr. Elijah Stone. Do I hear 160? Nothing. The square was silent. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down. Sold. The word landed in Clara's chest like a fist. She had been sold. Whatever came next, whatever this man with empty eyes and blood under his nails wanted from her, she was bound to him now. Stone approached the platform. He pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and tossed it to Fletcher without looking. Then his gaze returned to Clara, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. He was studying her. Not her body, not her figure, not the assets Fletcher had described. Her face, her eyes, as though he were looking for something specific and had not yet determined whether he had found it. Her belongings, he said. Where are they? Clara forced her voice to work. I do not have any. Everything I owned was lost on the journey here. For a moment Stone said nothing. Then he nodded. A single sharp movement. He turned and walked away. The crowd parted before him. Clara stood on the platform, legs frozen. Fletcher nudged her shoulder. Go on, then. He paid for you. She stepped down. Each step sent a tremor through her legs. She walked toward the retreating figure of Elijah Stone, every instinct screaming at her to run in the opposite direction. This man was dangerous. She knew it the way she knew arithmetic. It was a fact beyond dispute. When she reached him, he turned. His gaze dropped to her wrists, to the bruises there, dark rings left by the ropes they had used in the holding room to keep the women from fleeing before their turn on the platform. Something changed in his expression. The emptiness cracked just barely, and underneath it Clara glimpsed something that might have been anger, not directed at her. He spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Who did this?" Not "follow me," not a command. The first words out of his mouth, and they were a question about her wounds. Clara did not know what to do with that information. Elijah Stone did not touch her for the first 3 days, except once, when he thought she was sleeping. He hated himself for going to that auction. Hated it with the same cold, constant fury that had kept him alive for 8 years alone in the mountains. He hated that he had stood in a crowd of men and looked at women lined up like cattle and chosen one. He hated that desperation had driven him down from the peaks and into the stinking heart of civilization. He hated that when he saw her, standing on that platform with her spine straight and her eyes blazing and her mouth pressed into a line that refused to beg, something in his chest had stirred for the first time since he could remember. He was supposed to be dead inside. Dead was safe. Dead men did not feel the pull of a woman's defiance or the ache of seeing bruises on her wrists. Dead men did not lie awake at night wondering whether they had just saved someone or damned them. Coda had told him, blunt as always, "The girl is letting herself die, Eli. 5 days and she has not eaten. You need a woman. Not because you want one, because that child needs one before it is too late." So Elijah Stone, who had not spoken to more than 3 people in 8 years, who had built his cabin with his own hands in a valley no map recorded, who had killed a grizzly with a hunting knife and broken a thief's arm without hesitation, who had nightmares in which his hands were covered in blood and he could not tell whose, had ridden 2 days to Denver City, walked into a crowd that parted before him like water before a prow, and bought a woman for $150. He told himself it was for Lily. Only for Lily. He was not entirely certain he believed it. They rode north. Clara sat behind him on the black gelding, her arms around his waist because the trail was rough, and she had no other way to keep her seat. Through his hide coat he could feel her hands, small and cold, trembling slightly. She smelled of dust and unwashed skin and something underneath, faint, nearly gone. Lavender soap, maybe, from some earlier life. He noticed. He hated that he noticed, They barely spoke. The first day passed in silence, broken only by the horse's hooves and the creak of the saddle and the wind that came down from the peaks carrying the promise of early snow. Clara asked no questions. She did not complain about the cold or the rough riding or the dried meat and hard biscuits that constituted their meals. She ate what was offered, drank water from the canteen without being told, and kept her eyes on the landscape with an expression Elijah recognized. She was memorizing landmarks, filing away the route, calculating distances and directions the way a prisoner marks the walls of their cell. Smart, he thought, then corrected himself. Careful. She was not stupid enough to trust him, and that was the smartest thing about her. He watched her when she did not know he was looking. The way she washed her face in the icy creek without flinching. The way she divided her portion of dried meat and gave half to the pack mule before eating her own share. The way she studied the mountain peaks ahead of them, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like recognition, as though she had been waiting her whole life to see something this vast and untamed, and had simply not known it until now. On the second night, Clara fell asleep near the fire. The wind rose. The flames guttered and died to embers, and the cold crept in like a living thing. She shivered in her sleep, pulling her thin shawl tighter, and it was not enough. Her lips were going blue. Elijah watched from across the dead fire. He could rebuild it. He should rebuild it. Instead, he stood, removed the hide coat from his shoulders, the only thing standing between him and the mountain cold, and crossed to where she lay. He draped the coat over her carefully, the way a man might lay a blanket over a sleeping child. His hand hovered near her shoulder. He could feel the warmth radiating from her skin through the fabric of her dress. He did not touch her. His fingers closed into a fist and withdrew. He returned to his spot and sat in the cold for the rest of the night, arms wrapped around his knees, jaw clenched against the shivering, watching the stars wheel overhead and wondering what kind of fool freezes to death for a woman he met 24 hours ago. Come morning, Clara woke to find the coat draped over her. She sat up, blinking in the pale dawn light, and saw Elijah hunched by the dead fire, blue-lipped and shaking, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She did not thank him. She folded the coat, set it beside him, and said, "You will get sick if you do not put that back on." Her tone was matter-of-fact, almost cold, as though his gesture meant nothing. But Elijah saw her hands, the way they lingered on the hide as she folded it, the way her fingers traced the worn leather for just a moment longer than necessary. She was not ungrateful. She simply did not know how to accept kindness. Kindness to this woman was a debt, and she could not afford any more debts. He looked at her across the ashes. For the first time, he spoke first. "Who were you before all of this?" Clara considered the question. He watched the calculation happen behind her eyes, the rapid assessment of risk and benefit, the weighing of truth against fiction. She chose truth. "I was someone nobody wanted to keep." The words landed between them like a stone in still water. Elijah said, his voice like crushed gravel, "That makes two of us." They rode on. The landscape changed as they climbed higher. Grasslands gave way to forests of pine and spruce. The air thinned and cooled. Streams cut through rocky terrain, their water clear as glass and cold enough to ache. Late in the afternoon of the third day, Elijah stopped the horse on a ridge. Below them, a valley opened like a cupped hand, green and sheltered, with a creek running through its center. A cabin stood near the water. Smoke curled from its chimney. "Before you see the cabin," he said, "you need to know something." Clara waited. The girl, Lily, she is not right. She has stopped eating. 5 days now, maybe more. He paused, and Clara heard something in his silence that she had not expected. Fear. Raw, animal fear. Not for himself. "That is why I bought you. Not because I need a wife, because I need someone to save my niece before it is too late." Clara absorbed this. The calculation shifted. This was not what she had expected. Not what she had feared. "I am not a doctor," she said. "You are a woman. You are warm. You are alive." He stared at the valley below. "That is all I have got to give her." They descended. The cabin grew larger. And on the doorstep, a tiny figure stood, small and slight. Dark hair tangled past her shoulders, wearing a dress 2 sizes too large. The child was not looking at them. She was looking down at her own hands. Her hands were covered in blood. Clara was off the horse before Elijah could stop it. She slid from the saddle, hit the ground stumbling, and ran. The 47th drawing looked exactly like the first. A house. Fire. A figure standing outside, watching. Only one thing had changed. This time the figure had long hair. Clara did not know about the drawings yet. She did not know about the food hidden under the pillow, or the lamp that burned all night every night, or the way the child drew the same image over and over like a prayer or a warning or both. She did not know any of this in the first minutes when she ran across the hard-packed earth toward the cabin door, where a 6-year-old girl stood with blood on her hands and a silence in her eyes that went deeper than any word could reach. What Clara knew was this: the blood was real, the child was real, and whatever else this mountain man had brought her here to do, whatever contract or arrangement or transaction she had become a part of. There was a little girl standing alone with red hands and a face so empty. It made Clara's chest ache in a way she had not felt since she knelt beside her father's coffin at 15 years old and realized the world would never be safe again. She reached Lily, dropped to her knees, took the child's hands in her own without flinching from the blood. The blood was warm, fresh, not human, too bright, too thin. Clara's mind worked rapidly. Chicken blood. The feathery remains confirmed it moments later when she looked past Lily into the cabin and saw a dead hen on the bedroom floor, its neck wrung with more force than precision. Under the child's pillow, Clara found dried bread, strips of jerky, a cracked egg leaking yolk onto the sheets. A small, desperate cache of food hoarded by a child who believed that at any moment the eating might stop and never start again. Clara had read about this in her father's books. He had kept volumes on the new science of the mind, on the way trauma carved channels in the brain like water cutting through rock. She had read about children who hoarded food after famine, who could not sleep without light after witnessing violence, who repeated actions over and over because repetition was the only thing that felt controllable in a world that had proven itself savage and unpredictable. Reading about it and kneeling before it were different countries entirely. She did not say it is all right. It was not all right. Nothing about this was all right. She took a cloth from the basin, dampened it with water from the pitcher on the table, and began washing the blood from Lily's hands, gently, slowly, the way you handle something precious and breakable. "Are you afraid there will not be enough food?" Clara asked. Lily did not answer, but her eyes, which had been fixed on some middle distance that existed only inside her own head, shifted. For the first time, they focused on Clara. On this stranger kneeling on the floor with a damp cloth and a question that did not begin with "stop that" or "put that down." The look lasted 3 seconds. Then Lily pulled her hands away, retreated to the corner of the room, and sat down with a ragged doll clutched to her chest. She did not speak. Clara watched her go. Then she stood, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. The cabin was not what she had anticipated. She had expected the rough quarters of a man barely surviving in the wilderness. Dirt floors, a single room, the bare minimum required to keep a body alive between the first snow and the last. Instead, she found a space that told a contradictory story. The main room was large and well built, the logs fitted tightly, the fireplace constructed from river stone with the care of someone who understood that warmth was not a luxury in this country, but a matter of life and death. The furniture was simple but solid, made from wood that had been sanded smooth and fitted without nails. Someone with skill and patience had built every piece. But the cabin was also filthy. Dishes stacked in the basin, crusted with food. Lily's clothes unwashed and piled in a corner. The floor unswept. A smell of wood smoke and something sour underneath that spoke of a man who had given up on the small maintenance of daily life. Then Clara saw the books. They filled an entire wall. Shelves built from pine planks, bowed slightly under the weight. Shakespeare, Milton, Plato, Aristotle, a French translation of Les Miserables, Latin texts on philosophy and Roman law, volumes on botany, astronomy, mathematics, a collection that would not have been out of place in a university library, sitting in a log cabin in the Montana wilderness. Clara approached the shelves, ran her fingers along the spines. Some were worn nearly smooth from handling. Others had pages marked with strips of leather. Whoever lived here did not just own these books. He read them, again and again. On the small table beside Lily's bed, Clara noticed a book of fairy tales. It was open to a page so worn the paper had gone soft as cloth. The spine was cracked at this spot, fallen open naturally from being turned to the same page 100 times. Beside the book, a candle had burned to a stub. A chair was pulled close to the bed, its seat showing the permanent impression of heavy use. He reads to her, Clara thought, every night. This enormous, frightening blood under his fingernails man sits in that chair and reads fairy tales to a 6-year-old girl by candlelight. She did not know what to do with that information either. The door opened. Elijah stood in the frame, filling it completely, his shoulders touching both sides. He had unsaddled the horse and stabled the mule. His eyes went to Clara by the bookshelf, then to Lily in the corner, then back to Clara. "You can read any of them," he said after a moment. "Books are meant to be read." "You have quite a collection," Clara said. "I had a lot of time." She noticed the past tense. Had, as if that time were now over. He set rules that evening, delivered them flatly without apology, while Clara cooked a simple supper from the supplies in his larder. She was not to go outside after dark. She was not to enter his room. She was not to ask about his past. She was not to leave the valley. Ever. Clara set down the knife she was using to slice dried venison and turned to face him. I am not a prisoner. You are not. But if you leave this valley, I cannot protect you. Protect me from what? Silence. He turned and walked out, and the conversation was over. Clara stared at the closed door. Then she picked up the knife and went back to cutting venison. She would follow his rules. For now. Until she understood enough to know which ones were worth breaking. That night, with Lily asleep in her small bed and the cabin dark except for the glow of the banked fire, Clara heard something from the barn. Low, guttural animal. A sound of pain muffled by the walls but unmistakable. She crept to the window. The barn door was shut. Not just shut, padlocked. Something alive was inside. Something hurting. Clara's mind raced. She thought about the blood under his nails, the way the crowd had recoiled from him, the rules that sounded less like courtesy and more like containment. What did a violent, isolated man keep locked in his barn in the middle of nowhere? She did not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the small room that had been cleared for her and gripped a kitchen knife beneath the blanket, her mind calculating escape routes, distances, the time it would take to reach the valley's edge on foot with a 6-year-old in tow. Morning came, gray light through the window, the smell of coffee from the main room. Clara rose, tucked the knife into the fold of her skirt, and walked out to find Elijah sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a face that looked like it had not slept either. "What is in the barn?" she said. He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood, took a key from his pocket and walked outside. Clara followed. He unlocked the padlock and swung the door open. Inside, on a bed of straw, lay a wolf. Young, female, with dark fur matted with blood and a hind leg wrapped in rough splints fashioned from straight sticks and strips of rawhide. The animal snarled when the light hit her eyes, a sound that raised every hair on Clara's body. But the wolf did not lunge. She was too weak, too broken. Beside her sat a bowl of water and scraps of meat, both recently replenished. "Found her in one of my traps 3 days ago," Elijah said. "Leg was destroyed. Should have killed her. Easier that way." "Why did you not?" Long pause. The wolf watched them both with yellow eyes that burned with fury and fear, and something underneath that might have been the animal version of exhaustion. "She looked at me," Elijah said. Clara stared at the wolf. Then she stared at Elijah. Something shifted in her understanding of this man. Not trust. Trust was still miles away. Across terrain she was not certain she could cross. But the absolute certainty that she knew what kind of man he was developed a crack. A thin one. Enough to let a sliver of light through. She spent the morning cleaning the cabin. She scrubbed the dishes, swept the floor, washed Lily's clothes in the creek, and hung them to dry on a line she rigged between 2 pines. She worked with the methodical intensity of a woman who needed to control something, anything, in a world that had stripped her of every other form of agency. Lily watched her from the corner, silent, clutching the ragged doll. The child's eyes followed Clara's movements with the wary focus of an animal watching a predator, evaluating, measuring, waiting for the moment when the facade dropped and the real face appeared. That evening, Clara cooked porridge, her mother's recipe, nothing fancy, oats and water and a spoonful of sugar she found in a tin on the shelf. She set 3 bowls on the table. She placed a spoon beside each one. She sat down and began eating her own portion. She did not look at Lily. She did not coax or bribe or beg. She simply ate, as though this were the most ordinary meal in the world, as though there were nothing at stake, as though her heart were not hammering against her ribs while she waited. Lily sat across from her. The child's eyes moved from the bowl to Clara to the bowl again. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then a small hand reached for the spoon. Clara kept eating. She did not react. She did not smile or exclaim or make any sound at all that might shatter the fragile miracle happening on the other side of the table. Behind her in the doorway, she heard Elijah's breathing change, a sharp intake, a held breath, a swallow that sounded like it hurt. She did not turn around. She did not need to. She knew what was happening behind her without seeing it. A man who had spent 8 years turning to stone was discovering that stone could crack. After Lily fell asleep that night, with Rosie the doll tucked under her chin and the lamp burning low, Elijah came to stand outside Clara's door. She heard his footsteps stop, heard his breathing through the thin pine boards. He did not knock. He did not speak. He just stood there. Then he walked away. Clara lay in the dark, listening to the silence he left behind, and realized that she was not afraid of him. She was afraid of the safety his presence created. Because every single time in her life that she had felt safe with another person, that person had disappeared. She curled onto her side, pulled the blanket tighter. Outside, the wolf in the barn whimpered once and then went quiet. Something was beginning here. Something fragile and dangerous and unnamed. And Clara did not know whether to nurture it or run from it. She suspected she would not get to choose. The surveyor arrived on a Tuesday, asked 3 questions about property lines, and left with a broken collarbone. 4 weeks had passed since Clara's arrival. 4 weeks of rhythms slowly forming, like water finding its course down a mountain. She woke before dawn, made breakfast. Elijah ate quickly and headed out to check traps, hunt, do whatever solitary work the wilderness demanded. Clara stayed with Lily, cleaning, teaching, telling stories. Slowly, carefully, brick by brick, building a bridge across the vast silence that separated a traumatized child from the world. It was not easy. There were days when Lily would not speak at all, when she sat clutching Rosie and staring out the window with eyes that saw something Clara could not see and did not want to imagine. There were nights when the child screamed in her sleep, and Clara would hold her in the dark, rocking back and forth, whispering words that meant nothing and everything until the shaking stopped and sleep returned. But there were also mornings when Lily asked questions. What does the ocean look like? What do they teach at school? Can you show me how to write my name? Small openings, narrow doors. Clara walked through each one as gently as she knew how. One afternoon, Lily asked, "You have seen the ocean?" "I have. It is bigger than anything you can imagine. Bigger even than these mountains." Lily considered this with the grave solemnity of a child who takes all information seriously. "What does it taste like?" Clara smiled. "Like tears. Only more." Lily thought for a moment, then she said, "The ocean must be very sad." Clara's throat tightened. She was beginning to understand that Lily's silence was not emptiness. It was depth. This child felt everything. She simply lacked the words to carry what she felt, or perhaps she had learned that words were dangerous things that could be used against you. At night, Clara checked under Lily's pillow. Still crumbs, still the remnants of hoarded food. But less than last week, the cache was shrinking. Trust was growing, slowly, a fraction of an inch at a time. Then the surveyor came. He rode into the valley on a gray horse, wearing clean clothes and new boots and carrying a leather satchel. He had a pleasant face, forgettable, the kind of face designed to put people at ease. He found Clara outside the cabin, hanging laundry, and tipped his hat. "Morning, ma'am. I am surveying territorial land boundaries for the office in Helena. Might I trouble you with a few questions about the property lines?" Clara told him what little she knew. The property extended to the creek on the south and the tree line on the east. Beyond that, she was not certain. She was new here. The surveyor nodded, made notes in a leather-bound book, asked whether the property extended past the northern ridge. He did not see Elijah coming. None of them did. It was the thing about Elijah Stone that Clara had come to understand with visceral clarity over the past 4 weeks. For a man his size, he moved with a silence that defied physics. One moment, the tree line was empty. The next, he was there, crossing the clearing in 6 enormous strides. And before Clara could draw breath to speak, he had grabbed the surveyor by his coat and hauled him off his horse like a man pulling a weed from soft earth. The surveyor hit the ground hard. Elijah put a boot on his chest. "Who sent you?" The man's face went white. He stammered something about the territorial office, about legitimate business, about maps. Elijah leaned down. Clara could not see his expression from where she stood on the porch with one hand on Lily's shoulder, holding the child behind her. But she could see the surveyor's face, and what she saw there was pure animal terror. The surveyor scrambled onto his horse and fled the valley at a gallop, one arm hanging at an angle that said it was no longer functioning correctly. Elijah watched him go. His breathing was hard. His fists were still clenched. He stood in the clearing for a full minute after the hoofbeats faded, motionless, and Clara realized with a chill that he was not calming down. He was holding something in, something that wanted very badly to follow that horse and finish what it had started. When he finally turned and met her eyes across the clearing, Clara saw it plainly. Not anger. Something older and colder. Something that lived in his bones. 2 hours later, Coda arrived. Clara had met the Crow Man twice before, brief visits in which he brought venison or herbs, and exchanged clipped sentences with Elijah in a mixture of English and what Clara assumed was Apsaluki. Coda was lean and weathered, with deep-set eyes that missed nothing and a manner of speaking that cut through pleasantries like a knife through paper. "The surveyor works for Thomas Webb," Coda said, warming his hands by the fire while Elijah paced the length of the cabin. "Webb is filing papers in Helena. Forged deeds. He is claiming this valley as unclaimed territory." The words settled over the room like a weight. Clara watched Elijah's pacing grow tighter, more agitated. She understood now. He had not attacked a stranger without provocation. He had identified a threat to his home, possibly to his life and Lily's, and responded with the only language 8 years of isolation had left him fluent in. But understanding did not erase what she had seen. The speed, the efficiency, the absolute zero hesitation between perception and violence. She had watched a man switch from stillness to destruction like a lantern being snuffed. That image would not leave her mind. She filed it away, and she did not forget. The weeks continued. Clara and Lily drew closer. The child began speaking in full sentences, then in paragraphs, then in the long, wandering monologues that were a 6-year-old's natural mode of communication. She asked about Boston and the ocean and whether there were really buildings taller than trees, and if so, how did the birds feel about it? Clara answered everything. She taught Lily her letters. She read aloud from the fairy tale book at bedtime, taking over the role from Elijah not because he asked her to, but because Lily asked her. "Uncle Eli reads slow," the child explained with the devastating honesty of youth. "He does all the voices wrong." From his chair by the fire, Elijah made a sound that might have been a cough and might have been a laugh. Small moments accumulated. Clara washing clothes at the creek and sensing eyes on her. She looked up and saw Elijah at the tree line, stopped mid-stride, watching her. Their gazes held for one beat too long. Then he turned and took the long way around, adding 15 minutes to his walk rather than pass within 10 feet of her. She pretended she had not noticed, but her hands shook, wringing out the next shirt. Elijah returning from a hunt with blood on his sleeve and a gash on his forearm from a branch. Clara insisting on cleaning it. Her fingers on his skin for the first time, deliberate, necessary, and both of them pretending the contact meant nothing while the air between them grew thick enough to taste. Lily laughing for the first time. A real laugh, bright and sudden, at a story Clara told about a cat that fell into a milk churn. The sound rang through the cabin like a bell, and Clara looked up to see Elijah frozen in the doorway with an expression on his face that she could not name because she had never seen a man look like that before. Like someone who had been drowning for a very long time, and had just broken the surface. Then came the storm night. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows in horizontal sheets. Lily slept in Elijah's lap, her small body curled against his chest, Rosie dangling from one limp hand. Clara sat in the chair across from them, reading a French novel by firelight, but not absorbing a word because her eyes kept drifting to the man on the other side of the hearth. She finally asked the question that had been building for weeks. Why are people in Denver afraid of you? Elijah was quiet for so long that Clara thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low so as not to wake Lily, and he told her a story. 8 years ago, a man named Jonathan Caldwell was found dead in a stable on Stone Creek Ranch, Elijah's family ranch, the most prominent spread in the territory. Elijah had been standing over the body holding the knife. He told her about his family, his father who had built the ranch from nothing, his mother who had seen things she was afraid to speak of, his sister Sarah, who had married a good man and had a baby girl named Lily. He told her about being exiled, about his father selling land and borrowing money and bribing officials to keep his son from hanging, about the condition that Elijah disappear, about choosing the mountains instead of the east, because the mountains did not require you to pretend to be something you were not. He told her about 8 years of solitude, hunting, trapping, reading every book he could acquire, talking to his horse because human voices had become a foreign language. He told her most of the truth. But there were gaps. Clara heard them the way a musician hears a wrong note. Spaces where the story skipped, where Elijah's eyes shifted from hers to the fire, and his jaw worked as though chewing words he could not bring himself to swallow or spit out. She asked questions, sharp ones. Who found you with the knife? How long between your arrival and theirs? Which direction did they come from? He stared at her. She could see it in his expression, the unfamiliar sensation of having his story treated not as a tragedy to be pitied, but as a puzzle to be solved. There are gaps in your story, Elijah, she said. You have not told me everything. He did not deny it. There are parts I am not ready to say. Clara accepted this. But inside her chest, the alarm that had kept her alive through Boston and Independence, and the endless terrible miles between, blinked steadily. He was hiding something, and until she knew what it was, the wall between them would remain. The next morning, Clara cleaned behind the bookshelf. It had become her habit, this need to impose order on her small corner of a disordered world. She pulled each book, wiped the shelf, replaced it precisely. Between a volume of Shakespeare's histories and a Latin grammar, a folded paper slipped free and fluttered to the floor. The handwriting was feminine, elegant loops and careful curves, the penmanship of an educated woman. The paper was creased from being folded and unfolded many times, worn at the edges from handling. The date at the top made Clara's blood slow. It had been written 3 days before Sarah Stone died. She looked toward the door where Elijah had just stepped outside. Then she opened the letter and read. Sarah Stone's last letter was written in a hand that shook. The final words tilted downhill across the page, as though the writer was running out of time or courage, or both. Dear Eli, I need you to come home immediately. I have found something about the night Jonathan Caldwell died. Something that proves your innocence beyond any doubt. But I also know who truly committed the murder, and they are watching me. I can feel their eyes everywhere I go. If something happens to me, look in Mother's box, the one Father gave her on their wedding day. You will find everything you need inside. I love you, brother. Please come home. Sarah. Clara read it twice, 3 times. Her mind worked the way it always did, cold and fast, sorting information into categories. Facts, implications, questions. Sarah had found proof of Elijah's innocence. Sarah had identified the real killer. Sarah feared for her life. 3 days after writing this letter, Sarah was dead. Her wagon had gone off a mountain pass at night. An accident, they said. Clara did not believe in that kind of coincidence. The cabin door opened. Elijah entered with an armload of firewood and stopped dead when he saw what she held. Something happened to his face. Not anger the way Clara had expected. Panic. Pure, wide-eyed, chest-heaving panic. As though she had found a wound he had been keeping bandaged and had just ripped the dressing away. "Where did you find that?" "It fell from behind the bookshelf." "I was cleaning, and it appeared between two books." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the letter from her hands. Stared at it as though he had never seen it before, though she could tell from the worn creases that he had folded and unfolded it 100 times. "I know what it says." His voice cracked. "I have read it 1,000 times. She found proof, Elijah. Your sister found proof that you are innocent. This letter arrived 2 days after Sarah died." His jaw worked. "I was too late. I have always been too late." Clara felt the weight of that sentence. 2 days. 2 days between hope and its destruction. She could imagine him in this cabin, opening the envelope, reading those words, and knowing with sickening certainty that the one person trying to save him was already in the ground. "The box," she said. "Your mother's box. Do you know where it is?" "It should be at Stone Creek Ranch, in my mother's bedroom. But the ranch is controlled by Thomas Webb now, his former manager. He was the one who assumed control after my father died. When I tried to investigate Sarah's death, Webb's men ran me off with rifles." Clara stepped closer to him. "Your sister died trying to save you. Are you going to let her sacrifice mean nothing?" Something changed in his eyes. Something shifted, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. She had touched the one thing that could still move him. Not his own suffering, his sister's. Clara pressed forward. "I will find the box." "No, you cannot go. Everyone in the territory knows your face. I am nobody. I am just the woman you bought at auction. Nobody considers me a threat. It is too dangerous. Whoever killed Sarah could still be watching that ranch. Then I will be careful." "Clara, I am smarter than anyone in that town, Elijah." She lifted her chin. "Give me the chance." It was her flaw speaking. She knew it. The intellectual arrogance that made her believe she could outthink any situation, solve any problem, control any outcome through the sheer force of her mind. It was the same flaw that had kept her alive through years of poverty and abuse and a cross-country journey that should have killed her. It was also the flaw that would get her into trouble someday, because the world had a way of humbling people who thought they were the smartest one in the room. But today, it was exactly what Elijah needed to hear. He looked at her for a long time. She could see the war behind his eyes, the need to protect versus the knowledge that she was right. He couldn't go. He would be recognized, arrested, possibly shot on sight. She was his only option. "The Harvest Festival," he said finally. "The whole town celebrates. Everyone attends, including ranch workers. 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks." Clara felt her pulse quicken. 2 weeks to plan, 2 weeks to prepare, 2 weeks until everything changed. That evening, something shifted between them. Not the careful distance they had maintained, circling each other like planets in separate orbits, but something closer, warmer, more dangerous. Clara offered to cut his hair. "Lily said you look like a bear," she explained. "She says it scares her." It was not entirely true. Lily had said Uncle Eli's face is itchy when he hugs me, which was a different thing entirely, but Clara was not going to examine her own motives too closely. Not tonight. Elijah sat in the chair by the fire. Clara stood before him with scissors she had found in the kitchen drawer, a comb she had carved from a piece of antler, and a confidence she did not entirely feel. She began with his beard, trimming it close to the jaw, revealing for the first time the shape of his face underneath. A strong chin, a mouth that was softer than she had expected, the lower lip fuller than the upper. Then his hair, the dark mass of it tangled and wild, and her fingers moved through it, separating strands and cutting away the neglect of years. Neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Lily slept in her room. The wind whispered against the window panes. Clara worked slowly, carefully, and with every pass of the scissors, she became more aware of where she stood, between his knees, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at him. The wild man was gone. In his place sat someone she did not recognize. High cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from the same stone as the mountains outside. Lines around his eyes from years of squinting into sun and snow. A nose broken at least once and healed slightly crooked. Not handsome the way illustrations in magazines were handsome. Handsome the way mountains were handsome. Something shaped by force over a long time. Something that endured. "Do not look at me like that," he said. His voice was rough. "Like what? Like I am a good man. Are you not a good man?" The silence that followed was the loudest thing Clara had ever heard. "I do not know anymore," he said quietly. She went to her room, lay down, closed her eyes, heard his footsteps pass her door, stop, then continue. Sleep would not come. Not because of fear, because she was thinking about what Coda had said during his last visit, the words delivered with his typical flat precision. "He is a dangerous man. Do not confuse that with a bad one." And Clara was thinking, lying in the dark with her heart doing things she had not given it permission to do, maybe I am dangerous too. Before dawn, she checked under Lily's pillow. For the first time since Clara's arrival, there was nothing. No bread, no crumbs, no hidden food. Something was changing. In all of them. Clara rode into Pine Ridge wearing Maggie Holloway's second-best dress, with a derringer strapped to her thigh beneath the petticoat, and a list of questions she had memorized and then burned in the cabin stove. The Harvest Festival filled Pine Ridge's single main street, with more people than Clara had seen since Denver City. Farmers and ranchers and townsfolk pressed together in cheerful chaos, their voices competing with fiddle music from the saloon, and the shouts of children chasing each other between wagons. The smell of roasting meat and fresh bread and apple cider hung in the air. Clara moved through it like a ghost, smiling, nodding, playing the role she had designed for herself, the new wife, curious about her husband's hometown, asking innocent questions, listening with wide eyes and a mind that cataloged every answer like a clerk filing documents. She found Maggie Holloway behind the general store, taking a break from the crowds with a cup of cider and a pipe that she smoked, with the unashamed pleasure of a woman who had stopped caring about propriety decades ago. Maggie was 50, broad-shouldered, iron-haired, with hands roughened by 30 years of labor, and eyes that had seen everything the frontier could throw at a woman, and had decided to throw something back. She had been a saloon girl in Virginia City in the gold rush days. She had saved every dollar for 15 years, and bought herself a general store, and a reputation for honest dealing that was worth more than any man's opinion of her morals. She was also the most well-informed person in Pine Ridge because powerful men had been talking in front of her as though she were furniture for her entire life, and she remembered everything. "Webb changed the locks on the ranch house 2 months ago," Maggie said, between puffs on her pipe. "He fired old Mrs. Adler after she asked about a locked room on the second floor. He has had visitors from Helena, lawyers by the look of them, and that surveyor who came to your valley. He filed a report in Helena claiming the land was unoccupied." Clara absorbed this. Each piece of information slotted into the picture forming in her mind. A picture of a man named Thomas Webb who was systematically erasing the Stone family from every record and deed and legal document in the territory. "One more thing," Maggie said. She lowered her voice. "There is a woman you should talk to before you do anything foolish. Victoria Mercer. Used to be Victoria Caldwell, Jonathan Caldwell's sister. She married Judge Harlan Mercer 3 years ago, and she has not smiled once since the wedding day." "You understand what I'm saying?" Clara understood. She found Victoria near the church, standing apart from the celebration with the careful stillness of a woman who had learned that drawing attention to herself was dangerous. Victoria Caldwell Mercer was 28, dark-haired, fine-featured, wearing an expensive dress that did not fit properly, as though she had lost weight rapidly. Her makeup was careful, deliberate, layered in the specific way that Clara had seen before on women who needed to hide something. The bruises showed anyway. Faint discoloration at the wrist where the sleeve rode up, a shadow along the jawline that powder could not quite conceal. Victoria's eyes moved constantly, sweeping the crowd, always returning to one figure. A man standing at the whiskey booth, average height, thinning hair, soft hands, laughing with the easy confidence of someone who owned the room and everyone in it. Judge Harlan Mercer. Clara approached. "I know about Jonathan," she said softly. "I know Elijah did not kill him." She expected denial, outrage, the cold mask of a woman protecting a secret. Instead, Victoria looked at her with eyes so hollow they might have been empty rooms and said, "I know he did not kill Jonathan. I have always known." The words hit Clara like a slap. Victoria told her story in fragments, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes never leaving the distant figure of her husband. She had believed Elijah guilty at first, truly believed it. She had walked into that stable and seen him holding the knife and her brother on the ground, and grief had made the conclusion easy. It was only later, years later, that the doubts began. Small inconsistencies, things that did not add up. And then, 2 years ago, she had found financial documents in Mercer's study, Webb's records, shell companies, and worst of all, her own name, Victoria Caldwell, listed as an investor in the purchase of Stone Creek Ranch, bought with insurance money from Jonathan's death. "I did not know," Victoria said. "When I invested the inheritance, I thought I was simply putting money into property. I did not know the purchase was connected to my brother's murder. I did not know it was murder at all. Not then." "But you know now," Clara said. Victoria nodded. "And I cannot come forward. My name is on those documents. If the truth emerges, I look like a conspirator. And Harlan." She touched her wrist. The bruise. "Harlan would kill me, not as a figure of speech." Clara studied this woman. Not a villain, not a victim. Something more complicated and more human than either. A person who had let fear become silence, and silence become complicity, one day at a time, until the cage had locked from the outside. "If I could get you out," Clara said, "away from Mercer, away from Montana, would you testify?" Victoria's eyes went wide. "You cannot promise that." "I am not promising. I am asking." A long silence. Behind them, the fiddle played a reel. Children laughed. The festival churned on, oblivious. Then Victoria nodded. "Once?" Clara left the festival before sundown. She rode east toward Stone Creek Ranch with her heart hammering, and the Derringer a cold weight against her thigh. The ranch was larger than she had imagined. A massive house that would not have been out of place in an eastern city. A barn the size of a cathedral. Outbuildings, corrals, fencing stretching toward the mountains. This was what Elijah had lost. This was what Webb had stolen. The property was nearly empty, most hands in town for the festival. Clara tied her horse in a stand of cottonwoods half a mile from the main house and continued on foot, keeping low, using the barn for cover. The kitchen door was unlocked. She slipped inside and moved through rooms preserved like a museum. Furniture draped in dust cloths, portraits on the walls, stern-faced ancestors staring down through layers of grime. She found the staircase, climbed it, each step careful, testing for creaks. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a door. She pushed it open. The mother's bedroom, untouched in years, dust on every surface, the bed still made. A woman's brush on the vanity with gray hairs caught in its bristles. The room smelled of dried lavender and absence. Clara searched. Under the bed, in the wardrobe, behind the curtains, growing more frantic as minutes passed. Then she noticed the painting on the wall. A landscape scene, unremarkable, but mounted strangely close to the wall's surface. She reached behind it. Her fingers brushed something solid. A wooden box, inlaid with mother of pearl, hidden in a hollow carved into the wall itself. She opened it. Inside, a leather-bound diary, letters, and a single page covered in Sarah Stone's handwriting. Clara did not read them here. No time. She stuffed everything into her saddlebag, buckled it shut, and turned to leave. Down the stairs, through the hallway, into the kitchen. A coffee cup sat on the table, still steaming. A chair was pulled back as though someone had just stood up from it. Clara's hand went to the derringer. A voice behind her said, "Mrs. Stone," or should I say, Miss Bennet. She turned. Thomas Webb stood in the pantry doorway. He was 55, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and steady eyes and the calloused hands of a man who had worked his entire life. He held no weapon, only a coffee cup mirroring the one on the table. "I have been expecting you all week," he said. Thomas Webb poured Clara a cup of tea, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever witnessed, because his hands were perfectly steady. He set the cup before her on the kitchen table and sat down across from her with the calm of a man who had rehearsed this conversation many times in his head and was finally getting to deliver it. Clara's hand remained on the derringer beneath the table. Her finger rested against the trigger guard, not on the trigger, not yet. "I know what you found in that box," Webb said. "I know it proves Elijah innocent of Jonathan Caldwell's death, and I know you believe I am the villain of this story." "You killed Jonathan Caldwell," Clara said. "Yes." The word hung in the air between them. No hesitation, no flinch, no remorse. Jonathan Caldwell was a gambling drunk who beat his sister and threatened to blackmail me. The night he died, he came to that stable with a knife in his boot and a demand. "Half my earnings," he said, "or he would go to the authorities about the embezzlement." We argued. He pulled the knife. I was stronger. Webb took a sip of his coffee. The casualness of it turned Clara's stomach. "And then you let an innocent man take the blame," she said. Elijah Stone was standing over the body holding the murder weapon. I did not make anyone believe he was guilty. I simply did not correct them. That is the same thing. "No, Miss Bennet, it is not. But I understand why you think so." Clara's mind was racing behind her composed exterior. Webb was not what she had expected. He was not ranting or threatening or reaching for a weapon. He was talking to her as though they were equals sitting down to negotiate a business arrangement. That was more unsettling than any violence could have been. "I did not come here to debate morality," Webb said. "I came to tell you something you do not know." "And what is that?" "I did not kill Sarah Stone." Clara's reaction was immediate and instinctive. She did not believe him. A killer pointing the finger at someone else was the oldest trick in the world. She stood to leave. "Sit down," Webb said. His voice was quiet, not threatening, almost tired. "Read the diary, page 47. Then decide if I am lying." She hesitated. Every survival instinct told her to walk out that door and ride back to the cabin as fast as the horse could carry her. But curiosity was Clara's greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness, and it held her in place like a hand on her shoulder. She sat. She opened the diary to page 47. The entry was dated the night Jonathan Caldwell died. Written in the careful hand of Elijah's mother, a woman watching from her bedroom window. She had recorded not one man fleeing the stable that night, but two. Webb first, moving fast, heading for the bunkhouse. Then, 5 minutes later, another figure. A man who did not flee from the stable, but went back into it. A man Mrs. Stone recognized. Judge Harlan Mercer. Clara's blood went cold. "Mercer was there that night," she said. Webb nodded. Mercer was Jonathan's silent partner in the blackmail scheme. When Jonathan died, Mercer saw opportunity. He went back into the stable, rearranged the scene, made certain the knife ended up where Elijah would grab it. He engineered the frame from the start, and Sarah. Webb was quiet for the first time since the conversation began. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Heavier, older. "Your husband's sister discovered everything. The diary, the land fraud. Mercer has been using his position as territorial judge to acquire land through forged deeds and corrupted rulings. Crow land, settler land, hundreds of acres. Sarah found the records. She was going to expose it all. Mercer killed her. Mercer arranged the wagon accident on that mountain pass. He has men for that kind of work. Men who do what they are told and do not ask questions. Webb paused. Then he said something Clara did not expect. I warned Sarah to stop digging. She did not listen. She was braver than all of us, and it got her killed. Clara sat in Thomas Webb's kitchen in the house that rightly belonged to Elijah Stone, holding a dead woman's diary, and felt the ground shift beneath her. The world she had constructed in her mind, with its clear lines between guilty and innocent, good and evil, was cracking. Webb was a killer. That was fact. But the real monster was not sitting across this table. The real monster was in Pine Ridge right now, drinking whiskey and laughing, wearing a judge's authority like armor. Webb made his offer. I will testify about Jonathan. I will confirm everything in that diary. In exchange, you give me 48 hours to leave Montana Territory before Mercer discovers I have talked. Why should I trust you? You should not. But the diary confirms my story, and I could not have forged a dead woman's handwriting in her own hand. He pushed his coffee cup aside. His expression was flat, unreadable. You have maybe 3 days before Mercer moves. He has men watching Elijah's Valley. He knows someone has been asking questions. Get out of this house tonight, Miss Bennett, and tell Elijah Stone that the enemy he has been running from for 8 years is not me. Clara rode through the night. The mountains were black against a sky thick with stars, and the cold cut through Maggie's dress like it was made of paper. She pushed the horse hard, leaning low over its neck, the saddlebag with its cargo of proof bumping against her thigh. She reached the cabin at dawn. The sky was turning gray at its eastern edge. She dismounted, legs shaking, and pushed through the door. Elijah was standing just inside. He had not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his hair wild from running his hands through it, and when he saw her, something broke open in his expression, relief and fury and terror, all colliding at once. He moved fast. His hands closed on her shoulders, pulling her inside, checking her body for wounds, with a desperation that bordered on violence. Where were you? You disappeared all night. I thought you were dead. I thought they had taken you. I thought... I'm fine. You did not tell me. His voice rose, cracked, became a roar that filled the cabin. You went alone. You went to that ranch alone without telling me. And I woke up and you were gone, and Lily was asking where you were, and I did not know if you were alive or dead or... He stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. He was still gripping her shoulders. He looked down at his own hands, at the white-knuckled force of them on her arms, and Clara saw the moment he realized what he was doing. She saw the horror flood his face, the disgust, the self-revulsion of a man who has just proven every terrible thing he believed about himself. He released her as though she were made of fire, stepped back. His hands hung at his sides, shaking. From the bedroom doorway, a small voice. Uncle Eli. They both turned. Lily stood there in her nightgown, clutching Rosie, tears streaming down her pale face. She was staring at Elijah. She was afraid of him. Elijah saw it. Clara watched the blood drain from his face, watched him take another step back, watched him put his hands behind his back like a man surrendering to an arresting officer. I am sorry, he said. His voice was barely audible. I am sorry, Lily. I am sorry. He turned and walked outside into the cold morning. He did not come back for an hour. Clara held Lily, rocked her, pressed her lips to the child's hair and whispered nothing words, sounds without meaning, comfort without language. But her own hands were shaking, not from what Elijah had done, but from what she had seen in his eyes when he realized he had frightened a child. That kind of self-horror could not be faked. That kind of shame belonged to a man at war with something inside himself that he feared would win. When Elijah finally returned, his eyes were raw. and his voice was quiet, and his hands stayed in his pockets where they could not reach anyone. "Tell me everything," he said. "All of it. And then we decide what to do. Together." Elijah told her the truth at 3 in the morning, when Lily was asleep and the fire had burned to embers. Not because he was ready, but because she had left him no other choice. Clara had laid out everything. Webb's claims, the diary entries, Mercer's involvement, the land fraud, the engineered frame, Sarah's murder dressed as accident. She presented it the way her father had taught her to present an argument, with evidence and logic and a structure that left no room for doubt. Then she turned to Elijah and said, "Your turn. The gaps in your story. The parts you were not ready to say. I need them now, Elijah, all of them." He stared into the dying fire for a long time. The cabin was dark except for the low glow of embers and the single candle on the table between them. Shadows moved on the walls. "The night Jonathan died," he said, "I did not stumble onto that stable by accident." Clara waited. She did not prompt or push. She simply sat and let the silence do its work. The night before, at the Caldwell dinner party, Jonathan backhanded Victoria across the face. In front of 30 people, nobody moved, nobody said a word. Victoria was my fiancée. I was supposed to protect her, and I just stood there like every other coward in that room. His voice dropped lower. I went to the stable the next night to beat him, not talk, not warn, beat. I wanted to break his jaw. I wanted him to know what it felt like to be on the other end of a fist. Clara's breath caught. She held it. But he was already dead when you arrived. Dying. Not dead. Still breathing when I pulled the knife out. Dead by the time Victoria walked in. Silence settled between them like snowfall. "You did not kill him," Clara said. "No, but I went there intending violence. If I had arrived 5 minutes earlier, if Jonathan had still been standing, I might have killed him myself. I was angry enough." He looked at his hands. Those enormous, scarred, capable hands. "That is why I have never been able to fully believe in my own innocence. Because the intent was there. The violence was already in me. Webb just got there first." Clara absorbed this. She turned it over in her mind the way she turned every piece of information, examining it from multiple angles, testing it against what she knew. And then she said something that broke Elijah Stone's world open. "Having a violent thought and committing violence are two different things. You went to confront a man who beat a woman. That says something about you, not something dark, something human. The problem is not the anger, Elijah. The problem is that you have spent 8 years punishing yourself for a crime you did not commit because you are terrified of what you might have done." She paused. "Let the words land. Yesterday, when you grabbed my shoulders, you scared Lily. You scared yourself. But you also stopped. The second you realized what you were doing, you stopped. A beast does not stop, Elijah. A beast does not look at a frightened child and feel shame. You are not the monster they made you into. But you will become one if you keep living as though you already are." He was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not speak again. The fire popped. A log settled. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like breathing. "You're not afraid of me," he said. "Not a question, an attempt to understand. Yesterday, when you grabbed me, yes, I was afraid. Not of you hurting me, afraid that you would hate yourself for it and push me away. That is a different kind of fear." Then Clara told him her secret. Because he had given her his, and the only currency she had ever trusted was an equal exchange. "In Boston," she said, "before my uncle's family moved west, a man proposed to me, wealthy, older. I did not love him. I did not even particularly like him. But he was offering security, a home, food, the absence of fear. And I was so terrified of being poor, of being hungry, of being nothing, that I said yes." Elijah's eyes were on her face. "The morning of the engagement dinner, I stood in front of a mirror wearing a dress he had bought me, and I looked at myself, and I knew. I knew that if I walked through that door and smiled at that man and ate his food and slept in his house, I would be selling myself. The price was just higher and the transaction more polite than what happened on that platform in Denver City. She paused. The hardest part. So when you bought me at that auction, part of me thought, here it is. The thing I always feared. I finally became something to be purchased. And the worst part, a piece of me was relieved. Because at least the pretending was over. At least someone was being honest about what I was worth. You are worth more than. I know. Now I know. She met his eyes. But I needed time to learn that. And you, Elijah. You gave me time. You gave me space. You gave me books. You gave me... She almost smiled. You might be the first man in my life who thought my mind was more valuable than my body. Something crossed between them in the silence that followed. Not a kiss. Not yet. Something deeper than a kiss, which is the understanding between two people who have shown each other the worst thing about themselves and have not been turned away. Clara stood, crossed to where he sat, knelt before him and took his hands. Those enormous, scarred, dangerous hands that had killed a grizzly and built a cabin, and splinted a wolf's broken leg, and turned the pages of fairy tales by candlelight. These hands, she said, they scare you. He nodded. Barely. They saved a wolf with a broken leg. They read stories to a little girl every night. They built this cabin board by board. She pressed her lips to his knuckles. Let them be good, Elijah. They are good hands. He broke, not loudly. Elijah Stone did not know how to break loudly. His forehead dropped to her shoulder. His breathing went ragged. She held him while the fire died and the darkness gathered close and something old and heavy that he had been carrying for 8 years began slowly to loosen its grip. When dawn came, they were functional again. Clara presented the strategy. Coda would ride to Helena with the diary, the letters, Sarah's statement, everything. He would deliver it to the United States Marshal's office. Meanwhile, Clara and Elijah would stay in the valley so Mercer would not grow suspicious. But first, there was one more truth to uncover. Clara had been watching Lily's drawings. 47 versions of the same image. A house, fire, a faceless figure standing outside. She had studied them the way she studied everything, looking for patterns, for meaning, for the message hidden inside repetition. That morning, with sunlight pouring through the cabin windows and Lily sitting at the table eating breakfast without being asked, Clara spread the drawings across the surface. Lily, she said gently, the picture you draw, the house with the fire. Lily went still. Her spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. That is not a house, is it, sweetheart? The child shook her head. Small, almost imperceptible. It is a wagon, a nod, and the person standing outside, the one with no face. Clara kept her voice so gentle it barely stirred the air. You saw someone that night, did you not? Lily's eyes filled with tears. For a terrible moment, Clara thought she had pushed too hard, too fast, that the fragile trust they had built over weeks of patience and porridge and bedtime stories was about to shatter. Then Lily whispered. He pushed the wagon. Then he watched it fall. Mama screamed. Then she did not scream anymore. Clara pulled the child into her arms, held her, felt the small body shaking against her own. Do you know who he was? The man with the hammer? Clara did not understand at first. Then she did. The gavel. A judge's gavel looked like a hammer to a 6-year-old. Mercer. Over Lily's head, Clara met Elijah's eyes. He was standing in the doorway. He had heard every word. His expression was not grief. It was not rage. It was the stillness before a storm breaks, the held breath of the world before lightning falls. Coda leaves within the hour, he said. She is 6 years old, Elijah. We cannot put her on a witness stand. We will not have to. We have the diary. We have the financial records. We have Webb's testimony. Lily's account confirms what the evidence already proves. She will not need to face a courtroom. He knelt beside them, touched Lily's hair with a tenderness that contradicted every hard line of his body. "But she does not carry this alone anymore," he said. "That is over." Coda rode out at noon, the evidence wrapped in oilskin against his chest. Clara and Elijah stood on the cabin porch watching him until he disappeared into the tree line. 3 days, Clara said. 3 days, Elijah repeated. He reached down and took her hand. The first time he had initiated contact since the day at the auction. His palm was warm and rough and shaking slightly. At the edge of the forest, at the limit of Clara's vision, something caught the light. A glint of metal, binoculars, or a rifle barrel. Impossible to tell at this distance. Elijah's hand tightened on hers. "Get inside," he said. "Now!" They came at midnight. 4 men, not from the valley's only road, but from the eastern ridge where Elijah had not set warning traps because he believed no one knew that route. He was wrong. Elijah woke in the darkness with every sense screaming. Not a sound, not yet. Something older than sound. The instinct of a man who had spent 8 years sleeping with one ear toward the world and a knife within arm's reach. He crossed the cabin in 3 silent strides, reached Clara's door, opened it. Her eyes were already open. She was already reaching for the rifle beside her bed. "How many?" she whispered. He held up 4 fingers. They moved through the rehearsal they had practiced without ever discussing it, the wordless choreography of 2 people who understood what was at stake. Elijah carried Lily, still sleeping, to the back room, the room with the smallest window and the thickest log walls. He set her down. She woke, blinking, and her arms tightened around Rosie. "You are coming back," Lily said. Not a question. A command issued by a 6-year-old who had already lost too many people. "I am coming back." He returned to Clara, handed her the rifle. Their eyes met in the darkness. "If anyone gets past me, shoot. And if nobody gets past you," that half smile, barely visible. Then sit tight and wait. He went out through the back window, dropping to the ground without sound. The night swallowed him. Clara positioned herself between the bedroom door and the front entrance, rifle shouldered, barrel aimed at the door. Behind her, Lily pressed against the wall, Rosie crushed to her chest, silent, waiting. The first sound came from the barn. A scuffle, a truncated cry that ended before it fully began. Then silence. Clara counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. She heard movement to the east. A branch snapping, heavy breathing. A gunshot split the night. Then another, then a third. Silence again, worse than the gunfire. The silence that follows violence is a living thing, thick and electric. And Clara stood inside it with the rifle steady and her breathing controlled and every nerve in her body pulled tight as a bowstring. Footsteps on the porch, heavy, uneven. The door handle moved. Clara. His voice. But she listened. Listened to the rhythm of his breathing, the particular way he shaped her name, the emphasis on the second syllable that was his and his alone. She opened the door. He stood there barely. His left shoulder was dark with blood, soaking through his shirt and dripping from his fingers. His face was cut. His knuckles were split and swollen. Behind him the clearing held 3 motionless shapes. A 4th set of tracks led into the woods heading east, running. He swayed. She caught him. He was heavy, so heavy, and warm, and alive. She pulled him inside, got him to the chair, cut away his shirt. The bullet had gone through the muscle of his shoulder, missing bone but tearing a ragged channel through flesh. He would live. It would hurt like hellfire for weeks, but he would live. While she cleaned the wound, pressing cloth against the bleeding and wrapping it tight, she searched the unconscious men in the clearing. On one of them she found a folded paper, written instructions. Mercer's seal. The instructions did not say, "Kill Elijah Stone." They said, "Bring the girl, alive." Clara's blood turned to ice water. She returned to the cabin and showed Elijah the paper. His face went gray. "He wants Lily," she said. Elijah understood before she finished speaking. Lily was the sole legal heir to Stone Creek Ranch. If Elijah died and Lily vanished, Mercer could claim the property through the territorial court he controlled. But more than that. Lily was a witness, a 6-year-old who could identify a territorial judge as the man who murdered her parents. A threat that would only grow larger with time. "He will never stop," Clara said. "As long as she can talk, he will keep coming." Elijah pulled Clara and Lily close with his one good arm. The wounded shoulder screamed. He did not let go. "Then we make sure the whole territory hears her first." Dawn broke over the valley. Blood on the snow. Smoke from the fire. Clara sat on the porch with the rifle across her knees, watching the tree line. Elijah came to stand beside her, arm in a sling, face battered. But his eyes, for the first time since she had known him, were clear. "When this is over," he said. "When Mercer is finished and Lily is safe and my name is cleared, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to think about whether a man like me, with blood on his hands and 8 years of ghosts, deserves the answer I am hoping for." Clara looked at him, at the blood and the bruises and the impossible tenderness in his storm-gray eyes. "Ask me now," she said. "No," he almost smiled. "You deserve better than a proposal on a battlefield." She reached up and touched his face, the stubble, the cut on his cheekbone, the warmth beneath. "I have already decided," she said. "Whenever you are ready." The trial lasted 3 days. Lily Stone spoke 47 words. It was enough. The United States Marshal arrived from Helena with 4 deputies 7 days after Coda delivered the evidence. They rode into Pine Ridge on a cold November morning and went straight to the courthouse. By noon, Judge Harlan Mercer was in irons. Thomas Webb was arrested attempting to cross into Idaho territory. He cooperated as he had promised in exchange for a plea arrangement. Victoria Caldwell Mercer left her husband's house in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and walked 3 miles barefoot through frost to the marshal's camp. She offered her testimony without conditions. The trial was held in the Pine Ridge courthouse before a jury of 12 men from across the territory. Clara sat in the front row with Lily on her lap. Elijah sat behind them, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of his body, close enough that his hand rested on her shoulder when things grew difficult, which was often. The marshal read the diary entries aloud. The courtroom went silent. 8 years of lies unraveled in a dead woman's careful handwriting. Webb took the stand and admitted to killing Jonathan Caldwell. He described the fight, the blackmail, the self-defense. The jury would weigh his claim against the facts. But his testimony about Mercer, about the frame, about the land fraud and Sarah's murder, was delivered with the flat precision of a man who had nothing left to lose and had decided to tell the truth simply because he was tired of carrying lies. Victoria testified. Her voice shook. She described finding the financial documents, realizing her inheritance was blood money, living in terror of the man she had been forced to marry. She did not cry. The absence of tears was somehow more devastating than any breakdown could have been. Then came Lily. The courtroom was cleared of spectators. Only the judge, the jury, the attorneys, the marshal, Clara, and Elijah remained. Lily sat in a chair that was too big for her feet dangling above the floor, Rosie clutched in her arms. Clara knelt beside her, held her hand, nodded. Lily spoke in her small, clear voice. She told them about the night, the wagon, the sound of wheels on gravel, the man who pushed it, the terrible sound it made going over the edge, her mother's scream, the silence after. 47 words. The jury foreman covered his mouth with his hand. When Lily finished, Mercer stood in the defendant's box and began shouting, denials, accusations, threats. The marshal's deputies restrained him and dragged him toward the door. As he passed Elijah, he stopped, struggling long enough to speak. "You think this changes anything, Stone? You think clearing your name gives you back what I took?" Elijah said nothing. He watched Mercer disappear through the door and said nothing at all. The verdicts came swiftly. Judge Harlan Mercer, convicted of 2 counts of murder, conspiracy, land fraud, corruption of office, sentenced to hang. The execution would be carried out at the Montana Territorial Prison in Deer Lodge. Thomas Webb, convicted of manslaughter. His cooperation and the evidence of self-defense reduced the charge. Sentenced to 12 years at the Territorial Prison. Clara felt the injustice settle in her gut like a stone. 12 years for a man who had destroyed a family. But it was the deal they had made. The law was imperfect. She swallowed it. Victoria Caldwell Mercer, granted immunity for her testimony. She stood outside the courthouse after the verdict alone, and no one approached her. She was free and utterly destroyed. Clara watched her from the courthouse steps and felt something that was not quite sympathy and not quite contempt. Something closer to the heavy understanding that people are more complicated than the stories we tell about them. After the sentencing, old Horace Caldwell approached Elijah, Jonathan and Victoria's father, a man who had aged decades in days, his shoulders bowed, his hands trembling. "I knew my boy was cruel," Caldwell whispered. "I knew he hit women. I knew, and I did nothing. When he died, God forgive me, part of me was relieved." He paused. His voice broke. "I let you suffer for 8 years because facing the truth about my son was harder than letting an innocent man rot." Elijah listened. He did not speak. When Caldwell shuffled away, Elijah turned to Clara. His eyes were tired. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. "I hated that old man for 8 years," he said. "Now I just feel done." Clara took his hand, held it. Elijah Stone was formally declared innocent of all charges. His name was cleared in the records of the territorial government. Stone Creek Ranch was returned to him as rightful heir, along with a formal letter of apology from the territorial governor. They rode out to see it together. Elijah and Clara and Lily, on a crisp autumn afternoon, with the mountains blazing gold and red against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The house was grand, larger than Clara remembered from her midnight break-in. Lily ran through the hallways, her laughter bouncing off walls that had not heard a child's voice in years. Clara's mind engaged the way it always did. She walked through rooms making plans, this one for Lily, this one for a study. Here a schoolroom where she could teach not just Lily but children from neighboring ranches. She counted windows, measured spaces, calculated costs. For the first time since Denver City, she could see a future she could organize and control and build into something permanent. She turned to Elijah with shining eyes. "We could make this work. The cattle operation needs rebuilding, but the bones are solid. I could manage the accounts, start a school. Lily would have other children. We would be part of a community." "No." One word. Flat. Final. Clara stared at him. "What?" "I am not living here." The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of 2 people who understood each other. It was the cold silence of 2 people discovering they did not. Clara argued with logic. The ranch was valuable. It offered security, education for Lily, opportunity for all of them. Elijah countered with truth. "This house is full of ghosts. Every room holds someone I lost. The last time I stood in this hallway, I was running for my life. The walls remember, Clara. They remember, and so do I." "You are choosing to hide again," Clara said. Her voice was sharper than she intended. "After everything we went through to clear your name, you want to crawl back into your cave, and you want to control everything." Elijah's voice was equally sharp. "The ranch, the plans, the future. You are already rearranging rooms we do not live in. You are not building a home, Clara. You are building a fortress so you never have to feel unsafe again." It landed like a blow, because he was right, and she knew it, and knowing it made it worse. "That is not fair," she said. "No, but it is true." They stood in the bedroom where Elijah's parents had slept for 40 years. And for the first time since the auction, they were not allies. They were two damaged people whose damage pulled in opposite directions. Clara toward control, Elijah toward isolation. Neither wrong, neither right. Both afraid in ways they had spent months pretending they were not. Then a small voice from the doorway. "I like the cabin." They turned. Lily stood there with Rosie under one arm and a look on her face that was older than any 6-year-old had a right to wear. "The cabin is small," Lily said. "I can see all the doors." She clutched her doll tighter. "This house is too big, too many places for someone to hide." The words cut through the argument like a knife through rope. Clara understood instantly, completely. A child who had watched a man push her parents' wagon off a cliff. A child who drew the same picture 47 times because her mind could not stop replaying what she had seen. A child who hoarded food and feared the dark, and needed, above all else, to feel that the world was small enough to hold in her hands. The cabin was not a retreat. For Lily, the cabin was the only place on earth that felt safe. Clara looked at Elijah. He looked back. And in that look, the fight dissolved. Not because someone won, because the answer had never been about what they wanted. "The ranch stays in trust for Lily," Clara said quietly. "When she is old enough, she decides." Elijah nodded. "And we go home. Home. The cabin, the mountains, the creek and the books and the wolf that Elijah had released weeks ago, but that still came back to eat scraps off the porch." Clara felt something release inside her chest. Not the satisfying click of a plan falling into place. Something different. Something scarier and better. The feeling of letting go. Of choosing love over logic. Of trusting that the ground would hold even when she could not see every inch of it. They rode back to the cabin in late afternoon. Lily fell asleep against Clara's back on the horse, her small body warm and trusting. The mountains turned gold in the dying light. At the cabin porch, Elijah dismounted, helped Clara down, carried Lily inside and tucked her into bed with Rosie nestled under her chin. When he returned to the porch, Clara was watching the sunset. He stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched. "Clara. Marry me." She looked at him. He was not kneeling. He was not holding a ring. He was standing beside her with a bandaged shoulder and dirt under his nails, and eyes that held 8 years of darkness and 3 months of light. "Not because of a contract," he said, "not because I bought you. Because I love you. Because you made me believe I could be something other than what the world decided I was." "Yes. You do not want to think about it. I have been thinking about it since the night of the storm." She turned to face him fully. "Yes, Elijah. Yes. Yes." He kissed her, slow and deep and unhurried. The kind of kiss that does not ask for anything because it already has everything it needs. 3 months later, winter in the mountains. The cabin wore snow like a white shawl. Smoke curled from the chimney into a sky so blue it seemed painted. Inside, Elijah read to Lily by the fire, his voice warm and expressive. Nothing like the gravel rasp Clara had first heard at the auction. Lily laughed at the funny voices he made for the characters. She did not hoard food anymore. She slept with the lamp out. She had drawn a new picture last week. 3 figures standing in front of a cabin. No fire, no faceless watcher, just 3 people holding hands. Clara stood at the window with her hand resting on her belly. Still flat, but she knew. She had known for 2 weeks. She crossed the room, placed her hand on Elijah's shoulder. He looked up. Read her face the way he always did, instantly, as though her expressions were a language he had been born fluent in. "What is it?" Clara smiled. "We are going to need another bed." He stared at her. 1 beat? 2. Understanding broke across his face like sunrise. He set the book down, stood, cupped her face in his calloused hands with a tenderness that still surprised her and always would, because those hands could break a man's bones and turn the pages of a fairy tale with equal ease. "Lily," he said. His voice cracked. You are going to be a big sister." Lily erupted from the chair. Rosie went flying. "Really, really, truly," Clara said. The child launched herself at both of them, and they caught her. The three of them tangled together in front of the fire, laughing and crying and holding on. Later, Lily asleep, fire low. The cabin quiet except for the settling of logs and the distant sound of wind through pines. Clara sat at the table with a pen and paper. She wrote a letter. No address, no recipient. "Dear Clara, the one who stood on that platform and counted the cracks in the ceiling because counting was the only thing that kept you from screaming. I want you to know. It gets better. Not easier. Better. You will be scared, you will be angry. You will stand in a cabin with a rifle in your hands and a child behind you, and you will not hesitate. You will fall in love with a man who terrifies you, and he will be the safest place you have ever known. You will stop counting cracks. You will stop counting altogether. You will just live." She folded the letter, held it over the fire. "Who is that for?" Elijah asked from his chair. "Someone I used to be." She let it go. The paper curled, blackened, became ash. The past was smoke. The present was warm. She crossed the room and sat in his lap, something the old Clara would never have done. Too undignified, too vulnerable, too much. He wrapped his arms around her without a word. She rested her head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. Steady, strong, hers. Outside, the mountains held their silence. The stars appeared one by one, the way they had for 10,000 years and would for 10,000 more, indifferent to the small, fierce, impossible love burning in a cabin below. She had been auctioned for $150. She had been found for free. And that, she thought, as sleep pulled her under, and Elijah's arms tightened and the fire whispered its last, that was the only difference in the world that ever mattered. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.